Margaret Thornfield hated the blind girl who walked past her house every morning. When Sarah approached the mailbox with her golden retriever, Margaret grabbed her taser. "No dogs allowed," she snarled, pressing it against Max's neck. The convulsions started immediately. Sarah's military father would arrive soon. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Margaret Thornfield pressed the taser against the blind girl's golden retriever and pulled the trigger. Max collapsed, convulsing on the pavement as 16-year-old Sarah screamed. 7 minutes later, a military convoy arrived. Colonel Martinez had made one phone call. Margaret's nightmare was just beginning. Sarah Martinez walked slowly down Maple Street in Willowbrook Heights, her hand resting gently on Max's harness. The golden retriever moved with purpose, his intelligent brown eyes scanning for obstacles, his body alert but calm. At 16, Sarah had been blind since birth, but with Max by her side, she felt free. Max wasn't just any dog. He was Sarah's eyes, her independence, her best friend rolled into one furry package. The $50,000 training had made him perfect at his job. He could navigate busy streets, find doors, detect low-hanging branches, and most importantly, keep Sarah safe from harm. "Good boy, Max," Sarah whispered as they approached the community mailbox. She was expecting a letter from her father, Colonel James Martinez, who was deployed overseas with the Army. These letters were her lifeline to the man who had raised her alone since her mother died of cancer 3 years ago. The morning was peaceful. Birds sang in the oak trees. A gentle breeze carried the scent of roses from Mrs. Chen's garden. Sarah smiled, enjoying one of her favorite parts of the day, her independence walk with Max. But today would be different. Today would change everything. "Excuse me. What do you think you're doing?" The harsh voice cut through the peaceful morning like a knife. Sarah stopped immediately, her hand tightening on Max's harness. The dog sensed trouble and positioned himself protectively beside his handler. "I'm just checking my mail," Sarah said politely, though her heart began to race. She had learned to be careful around angry voices. People sometimes acted strangely around her disability. The voice belonged to Margaret Thornfield, the self-appointed queen of Willowbrook Heights. At 52, Margaret had never worked a real job, living off her dead husband's insurance money while wielding the HOA presidency like a weapon against anyone who dared disturb her vision of suburban perfection. Margaret stood 5 feet tall but commanded attention through pure entitlement. Her platinum blonde hair was sprayed into an immovable helmet. Her designer tracksuit was pristine despite never actually exercising. Her face was twisted with the kind of anger that comes from a lifetime of getting her way. "Dogs are not allowed in common areas," Margaret shrieked, marching toward Sarah with determination. "I don't care what kind of vest that mutt is wearing. Rules are rules." Sarah felt her stomach drop. This was her worst nightmare, being confronted for having Max with her. "Ma'am, this is Max, my guide dog. He's a service animal, which means he's legally allowed anywhere I go. The Americans with Disabilities Act." "I don't care about some liberal disability nonsense," Margaret interrupted, her voice rising to a pitch that hurt Sarah's sensitive ears. "My community, my rules. Get that filthy animal out of here right now." Max sensed the hostility radiating from the woman and stepped slightly forward, not aggressively but protectively. His training had taught him to position himself between Sarah and any potential threat. He was a gentle soul who had never hurt anyone in his life. "Please, ma'am," Sarah said, her voice shaking now. "I just want to get my mail. My father is deployed with the Army, and I'm expecting a letter from him. Max is trained to help me." "I don't care if your father is the president himself," Margaret snarled, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling animal control to have this beast removed. And then I'm calling the police to have you arrested for trespassing." Tears welled in Sarah's sightless eyes. The injustice of the situation overwhelmed her. Here she was, a 16-year-old girl just trying to check her mail, being treated like a criminal for having a disability. "Max, forward," she whispered, hoping to simply retrieve her mail and escape before things got worse. But Margaret wasn't finished. As Sarah and Max moved toward the mailbox, Margaret stepped directly into their path. Max stopped immediately, trained never to lead his handler into a person, even one being hostile. "I said get out," Margaret screamed, her face turning purple with rage. Several neighbors had begun to peek out their windows, drawn by the commotion. "Ma'am, please move," Sarah pleaded. "Max can't guide me around you if you're blocking our path." People were starting to gather now. Mrs. Chin from 3 houses down had come outside. Mr. Rodriguez from the corner house was watching from his porch. Even little Tommy Patterson had pressed his nose against his bedroom window to see what all the shouting was about. That's when Margaret made the decision that would destroy her life forever. Reaching into her designer purse, she pulled out a small black device, a taser she'd bought online after convincing herself that the world was full of threats to her precious community. She had never used it before, but rage and entitlement had clouded whatever judgment she might have once possessed. "I'll move your dog myself," Margaret hissed, raising the taser. "No, please don't," Sarah began, but it was too late. Without warning, without mercy, without a shred of human decency, Margaret Thornfield pressed the taser against Max's neck and pulled the trigger. The sound was like lightning cracking through Sarah's world. Max yelped in agony and confusion as 50,000 volts of electricity coursed through his gentle body. The beautiful dog who had never hurt anyone, who lived only to serve and protect Sarah, collapsed to the ground, convulsing uncontrollably. "Max!" Sarah screamed, dropping to her knees beside her fallen companion. Her hands frantically searched for him, finding his trembling form on the hot pavement. "Oh God, Max! Please be okay, boy. Please." The dog's breathing was labored, his eyes unfocused and glazed with pain. Drool mixed with blood trickled from his mouth where he had bitten his tongue during the violent convulsions. His service vest was twisted around his body, and his normally alert and intelligent expression was replaced by confusion and fear. Margaret stood over them both, taser still in hand, looking satisfied with her handiwork. There was no remorse in her eyes, no recognition of the horror she had just committed. "Maybe now you'll learn to follow the rules," she said coldly, as if she had just disciplined a misbehaving child rather than tortured an innocent animal. Several neighbors had emerged from their houses, drawn by Sarah's heartbroken screams. Mrs. Chen rushed over, her kind face pale with horror at what she had witnessed. "Margaret, what have you done?" Mrs. Chen gasped, kneeling beside Sarah. "That's a service dog. That girl is blind." "I don't care what kind of dog it is," Margaret replied, not an ounce of remorse in her voice. "Rules are rules. No dogs in common areas." Sarah cradled Max's head in her lap, tears streaming down her face. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, though her voice was breaking with each word. "You're such a good boy. The best boy in the world. Please don't leave me. Please." Mr. Rodriguez pulled out his phone with shaking hands. "I'm calling 911, he announced, his voice filled with disgust at what he had just witnessed. "Don't you dare," Margaret snapped, whirling to face him. "That girl was trespassing with an illegal animal. That's a guide dog, you monster." Mrs. Chin shouted, her usually gentle demeanor shattered by the cruelty she had witnessed. "She's blind. How can you be so heartless?" More neighbors gathered, and the mood in the air began to shift dramatically. People who had previously been neutral or even supportive of Margaret's strict enforcement of HOA rules were seeing her true nature for the first time, and they were horrified. Young Tommy Patterson, only 8 years old, tugged on his mother's sleeve with tears in his eyes. "Mommy, why did the mean lady hurt the doggy? The doggy was just helping the blind girl." His innocent question hung in the air like an accusation that cut through every adult present. Several people looked ashamed that a child had to witness such senseless cruelty. Margaret, realizing that public opinion was turning against her quickly, decided to double down on her position rather than show any hint of remorse. "This is my community, and I'll protect it from any threats," she declared loudly, raising the taser again. "That includes aggressive animals and people who think they're above the rules because of some supposed disability." "Max has never been aggressive a day in his life," Sarah sobbed, still holding her wounded companion close to her chest. "He's never even barked at anyone. He just wants to help me live a normal life." The paramedics arrived first, their sirens wailing as they pulled up to the scene. They were followed closely by 2 police cars, their red and blue lights flashing against the houses of Willowbrook Heights. Officer Janet Williams, a 20-year veteran of the police force, immediately assessed the situation. She had seen many disturbing things in her career, but the sight of a blind teenager cradling her injured service dog while an entitled woman stood over them with a taser made her blood pressure spike dangerously. "Ma'am, I need you to put that weapon down immediately," Officer Williams commanded, her hand moving instinctively to her own taser. "It's not a weapon, it's personal protection," Margaret argued, though she lowered the device slightly. "And I was protecting my community from this menace and her aggressive animal." The paramedic, a kind man named Dave who had a German Shepherd at home, knelt beside Max with gentle movements. He had seen many injured animals in his career, but something about this situation, the senseless cruelty of it, made his heart ache. "Let me take a look at him, sweetheart," he said gently to Sarah, his voice filled with compassion. Sarah reluctantly moved her protective hands as Dave began examining Max. The dog was conscious but clearly disoriented, his vital signs elevated from the electrical shock that had coursed through his body. "He needs to get to a veterinary hospital immediately," Dave said, his professional demeanor barely concealing his anger at what had been done to the innocent animal. The electrical shock could have caused damage to his heart or nervous system. "I'll drive them," Mrs. Chin offered immediately, her maternal instincts kicking in as she looked at Sarah's tear-stained face. "No," Officer Williams interjected firmly. "This is now an active crime scene. I need to take statements from everyone present. And you," she pointed directly at Margaret with barely controlled fury, "are under arrest for animal cruelty, assault with a weapon and violation of federal disability laws." Margaret's jaw dropped in genuine shock. In her twisted worldview, she was the victim here, the defender of community standards being persecuted for doing the right thing. "You can't arrest me," she protested loudly. "I'm the HOA president. I was enforcing community standards and protecting residents from dangerous animals." "You tasered a service dog," Officer Williams replied, pulling out her handcuffs with satisfaction. "That's a federal crime. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it." As Margaret was being read her Miranda rights, her protests growing louder and more indignant, more people continued to arrive on the scene. The story had already begun spreading through social media at lightning speed, as Mr. Rodriguez had been live streaming the entire incident on Facebook Live. The video of Margaret tasering Max and showing absolutely no remorse afterward was already being shared thousands of times across multiple platforms. Comments poured in from around the world, expressing outrage, heartbreak, and demands for justice. "This is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen," wrote one commenter. "How can anyone be so cruel to an innocent service dog? That poor girl," wrote another. "Imagine being blind and having someone attack your guide dog. It's like attacking her eyes." But the most significant arrival was yet to come. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb with military precision, and out stepped a man in crisp Army dress uniform. Not just any uniform, the dress blues of a U.S. Army colonel, chest decorated with ribbons and medals that spoke of years of honorable service and sacrifice. Colonel James Martinez had been in the middle of a crucial video conference with Pentagon officials when his phone exploded with notifications. A neighbor had his emergency contact information and had called to tell him what had happened to Sarah and Max. Within 6 minutes of ending that call, every string the colonel had ever pulled in his 25-year military career was being yanked with desperate urgency. He had made calls to generals, senators, federal prosecutors, and anyone else who could help ensure justice for his daughter. By the time he walked onto that scene, Margaret Thornfield's fate was already sealed, though she didn't know it yet. "Daddy!" Sarah cried out when she heard his familiar, authoritative footsteps approaching. Colonel Martinez rushed to his daughter without regard for military bearing, kneeling beside her and Max on the pavement. His weathered hands that had signed deployment orders and held dying soldiers, now trembled as he gently examined his daughter's beloved companion. "I'm here, Mija," he whispered, using the Spanish endearment that had always comforted her since childhood. "Daddy's here now. Everything's going to be okay." He looked up at Officer Williams with the bearing of a career military officer, and she immediately recognized the authority and controlled fury in his eyes. "Colonel Martinez," he said, introducing himself with military precision. "This is my daughter Sarah and that's Max." "I'm sorry, sir," Officer Williams replied respectfully. "We've arrested the perpetrator. She tasered your daughter's guide dog without any provocation whatsoever." The colonel's jaw tightened visibly, but his voice remained perfectly controlled, the voice of a man accustomed to command under pressure. "What's the current status of the dog?" "He needs immediate veterinary care," Dave the paramedic replied. "But he's conscious and responding to stimuli, which is encouraging." "Get him to the best veterinary hospital in the state," the colonel ordered without hesitation. "Money is absolutely no object. I want the finest care available." Margaret, who was standing beside the police car in handcuffs, couldn't help but insert herself into the conversation with her characteristic lack of self-awareness. "Oh, so now the military thinks they can just waltz in here and intimidate law-abiding citizens who are trying to protect their—" She never finished the sentence. The look Colonel Martinez gave her could have frozen hellfire itself. This was a man who had stared down enemy combatants in 3 different war zones, who had led soldiers through impossible missions, who had earned every ribbon on his chest through blood, sweat, and unwavering dedication to justice. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the full authority of command. "You have attacked my daughter and her service dog. In the military we have a saying, mess with my family and you mess with the full force of the United States military. I want you to understand something very clearly. The complete weight of the United States military legal system is about to come down on your head like the hammer of God." Margaret scoffed, though with notably less confidence than before. "You can't scare me with your military threats and intimidation tactics." Colonel Martinez smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just cornered his prey. "Ma'am, when you attacked a federally protected service dog, you violated federal law. When you discriminated against my disabled daughter, you violated her constitutionally guaranteed civil rights. When you used a weapon against a service animal, you committed a federal crime that falls under domestic terrorism statutes. I don't need to threaten you. I just need to make some phone calls." He pulled out his phone and, while everyone watched in fascination, placed a call that would change Margaret's life forever. "General Morrison? Is Jim Martinez. I need a favor, sir." The conversation was brief, professional, and terrifying in its implications. Everyone could hear the colonel explaining the situation in military precise terms, his voice never rising but carrying the weight of absolute authority. When he hung up, he looked at Margaret again with those cold, professional eyes that had seen combat and never flinched. "Ma'am, in approximately 30 minutes, federal agents will be here to take you into custody. This case is now being handled by the FBI Civil Rights Division and the Department of Justice's Disability Rights Section. You're looking at federal charges that carry a maximum sentence of 15 years in federal prison." Margaret's face went completely white, the color draining from her cheeks like water from a broken dam. You can't do that. I have rights." "Actually, ma'am, I can and I have. You see, attacking service animals isn't just cruel, it's classified as an act of domestic terrorism against the disabled community. The Patriot Act has some very interesting provisions about domestic terrorism that I think you're about to become intimately familiar with." Officer Williams looked genuinely impressed. She had been hoping to throw the book at Margaret, but apparently the colonel was preparing to throw the entire law library. An ambulance specifically equipped for animal transport arrived, and Max was carefully loaded inside with all the gentleness usually reserved for human patients. Sarah rode with him, her father following closely behind in his sedan, his jaw set with determination. As they pulled away, Margaret was being transferred to federal custody, her world crumbling around her as she finally began to understand the magnitude of what she had done. Within hours, the video of Margaret tasering Max had gone viral in the truest sense of the word. News stations across the country picked up the story. Social media exploded with outrage and demands for justice. #Justice for Max began trending worldwide, with millions of people sharing the video and expressing their horror at what they had witnessed. The local news interviewed neighbors, and the picture that emerged of Margaret was absolutely damning. Story after story surfaced of her abusing her position as HOA president, harassing families, and targeting anyone she perceived as different or threatening to her vision of suburban perfection. The Rodriguez family revealed that she had tried to have their son's wheelchair ramp removed because it was unsightly and decreased property values. The Chens told reporters how she had called immigration services on their elderly grandmother despite the fact that Mrs. Chen's mother was a naturalized American citizen. The Pattersons shared how she had tried to ban their autistic son from using the community playground because his stimming behaviors were disruptive. A pattern emerged of systematic harassment, discrimination, and abuse of power that painted Margaret as a neighborhood tyrant who had finally gone too far. At the veterinary hospital, Max underwent extensive testing under the care of Dr. Sarah Kim, the lead veterinarian and a specialist in trauma cases. The electrical shock had caused some temporary neurological effects, but Dr. Kim was cautiously optimistic about his recovery. "He's an incredibly strong dog," she told Colonel Martinez and Sarah as they sat in the waiting room. "Guide dogs are bred and trained to be resilient, both physically and mentally. With proper time and care, I believe he'll make a complete recovery." Sarah had refused to leave Max's side throughout the entire ordeal. She sat beside his kennel in the recovery area, reading him stories from her Braille books and singing the same lullabies her mother used to sing to her when nightmares kept her awake. The sight of this brave young woman comforting her injured companion brought tears to the eyes of every staff member at the hospital. Nurses who had worked in veterinary medicine for decades said they had never seen such a pure bond between human and animal. "She talks to him like he understands every word," one nurse whispered to another. "And you know what? I think he does." Meanwhile, The legal machinery was grinding into motion with the precision and efficiency of a military operation. Federal prosecutors had taken one look at the video evidence and decided to make Margaret Thornfield an example that would be remembered for decades. The charges kept mounting as investigators dug deeper into her behavior. Federal animal cruelty charges, 5-year maximum sentence. A violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, 10-year maximum. Civil rights violations under color of authority, 15-year maximum. Assault with a deadly weapon, state charges, 7-year maximum. Intimidation of witnesses, federal charges, added when she tried to pressure neighbors not to testify. A conspiracy to violate civil rights, added when they discovered her pattern of harassment. Margaret's lawyer, an expensive defense attorney named Richard Blackwell who specialized in getting wealthy people out of trouble, tried desperately to negotiate a plea deal. But Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Hayes, a no-nonsense prosecutor who had built her career on civil rights cases, wasn't interested in deals. Your client tasered a blind girl's service dog and showed absolutely no remorse, ADA Hayes told Blackwell during their first meeting. She then attempted to justify her actions by claiming she was protecting her community from a disabled teenager. This case is going to trial, Mr. Blackwell, and your client is going to prison for a very long time. The community of Willowbrook Heights was in complete upheaval. An emergency HOA meeting was called to remove Margaret from her position, but she had already been suspended automatically due to her federal indictment. The neighbors who had witnessed the attack spoke passionately about what they had seen, their voices shaking with emotion and barely controlled anger. "I've lived in this community for 15 years, said Mrs. Chin, her normally soft voice trembling with rage. "I've seen Margaret be petty and cruel before, but what she did to that sweet, innocent dog and that poor girl, it was pure, concentrated evil." Mr. Rodriguez showed the video he had taken to the packed meeting room. There wasn't a dry eye in the house as people watched Max collapse in convulsions and heard Sarah's heartbroken, desperate screams echoing through their community. "We need to do something meaningful," declared Tom Patterson, his voice thick with emotion. "That family has been through enough tragedy. The girl's mother died of cancer, her father is deployed overseas serving our country, and now this senseless attack. We have a responsibility to make this right." The community rallied around Sarah and Max in a way that restored faith in human nature. A GoFundMe campaign for Max's medical expenses raised $200,000 in just 3 days. Local businesses donated gift cards, services, and supplies. Children from Sarah's high school made hundreds of get-well cards for Max, decorating them with drawings of dogs and hearts. But perhaps the most touching gesture came from the most unexpected source. 3 days after the attack, a convoy of military vehicles pulled up to Colonel Martinez's house. Out stepped a group of soldiers, members of the colonel's unit who had gotten emergency leave to fly back from their deployment specifically to support their commander's family. "Sir," said Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez, the colonel's aide and a woman who had served with him for 8 years, "we heard about what happened to Sarah and Max. The entire unit wanted to do something special. They had brought with them a specially trained military working dog, a German shepherd named Thor who was retiring from active service. Thor had been trained not just in military operations, but also in service dog tasks as part of an experimental program. The unit had arranged for him to be donated to Sarah as a backup companion for Max during his recovery period." Sarah was completely overwhelmed by the gesture. She sat in her backyard with Max, who was now home and slowly recovering his strength, on one side and Thor on the other. Both dogs seemed to instinctively understand their roles. Max remained her primary guide, but Thor would be there to help whenever Max needed rest or medical attention. "You guys didn't have to do this," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "This is so much more than I ever expected." "Yes, we did have to do this," replied Colonel Martinez, his own voice thick with emotion as he watched his military family care for his daughter. "You're part of our military family, Sarah. We take care of our own no matter what." The trial began 6 months later in federal court. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity with supporters of Sarah and Max, including many of her neighbors, classmates, members of the disability rights community, and veterans who had heard about the case. Margaret's defense strategy was to claim that she had acted in reasonable self-defense, arguing that she had felt genuinely threatened by Max and had responded to protect herself and her community. This strategy backfired spectacularly when the prosecution showed extensive video evidence of Max's behavior throughout the entire incident. The footage clearly showed that Max had never moved aggressively, never barked, never bared his teeth, never done anything except stand calmly and protectively beside his handler. His body language throughout the encounter was textbook service dog behavior, alert but non-threatening, protective but not aggressive. The prosecution called a devastating series of witnesses. Dr. Kim testified about Max's injuries and the psychological trauma he had suffered, explaining how service dogs could develop PTSD just like humans. Sarah herself took the stand, and her testimony about the attack and its aftermath left several jurors openly weeping. "Max isn't just my dog," she said, her voice steady despite the obvious emotion. "He's my independence made manifest. He's my confidence walking on four legs. He's my ability to navigate the world safely." When Miss Thornfield heard him, she didn't just attack an animal, she attacked my fundamental right to exist freely and safely in society. Colonel Martinez's testimony about the impact on his family was equally powerful. "My daughter has already lost her mother to cancer and deals with blindness every single day of her life. She has shown incredible strength, courage, and resilience in the face of challenges that would break most adults. To see her attacked simply for having a disability, to see her best friend tortured in front of her for no reason except pure malice. It's something no parent should ever have to witness." Perhaps the most devastating testimony came from Margaret's own neighbors. One by one they took the stand to describe years of harassment, discrimination, and systematic abuse of power that painted a picture of a person consumed by hatred and control. "She once tried to have my 7-year-old son's medical equipment removed from our front porch because she claimed it was unsightly and brought down property values," testified Jennifer Patterson, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "My son has cystic fibrosis and needs a nebulizer to breathe properly. She literally said that his medical needs were less important than neighborhood aesthetics." The defense tried desperately to paint Margaret as a dedicated community leader who had simply made a tragic mistake in judgment. But the evidence was overwhelming, her complete lack of remorse throughout the entire proceedings was damning, and her attempts to justify her actions only made things worse. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, an almost unprecedented speed for a federal case of this complexity. "Guilty on all counts." The words rang through the courtroom like a bell of justice. Margaret Thornfield was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay $500,000 in damages to Sarah and Max, complete 2,000 hours of community service at disability rights organizations upon her release, and was permanently banned from holding any position of authority in any homeowners association. As she was led away in handcuffs, Margaret finally showed some emotion, but it was anger and self-pity, not remorse or understanding. "This isn't fair," she shouted at the courtroom full of people whose lives she had tried to control and damage. "I was just trying to protect my community. I was doing what needed to be done." Judge Patricia Hawkins, a 20-year veteran of the federal bench who had presided over hundreds of civil rights cases, had heard enough of Margaret's excuses. "Miss Thornfield," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a sword of justice, "throughout these proceedings, you have shown no remorse for your actions, no understanding of the profound harm you caused, and no respect whatsoever for the civil rights of others. You attacked a blind child and her service dog out of pure malice, bigotry, and an inflated sense of your own authority. This sentence reflects not just the severity of your crimes, but the absolute necessity of sending a clear message that such hatred, discrimination, and violence will never be tolerated in our society." Outside the courthouse, Colonel Martinez read a prepared statement to the gathered media, with Sarah standing proudly beside him and Max at her side, looking healthy, alert, and back to his professional best. "Today, justice was served not just for Sarah and Max, but for every person with a disability who has ever faced discrimination, harassment, or violence," the colonel said. "This case was never about revenge, it was about ensuring that people with disabilities can live with dignity and that their service animals are protected under the law. My daughter Sarah has shown incredible strength and courage throughout this ordeal, and Max has recovered completely from his injuries." Sarah, now 18 and preparing for her first year at Stanford Law School, stepped forward to address the crowd. "I want to thank everyone who supported us during this difficult time," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Max and I are living proof that people with disabilities can contribute meaningfully to society when we're given the chance and treated with basic human dignity. What happened to us was horrible and traumatic, but the overwhelming love and support we received from our community, from strangers across the country, and from my father's military family showed us that there are far more good people in the world than bad ones." She paused, reaching down to stroke Max's golden head as cameras captured the moment. "Max is more than my service dog, he's my partner in independence, my companion in confidence, and my very best friend in the entire world. No one has the right to take that away from any person with a disability, ever. I'm going to law school to specialize in disability rights so I can make sure this never happens to anyone else." The crowd applauded thunderously, and Max, as if he understood the significance of the moment and his role in creating positive change, sat up straighter and wagged his tail with quiet pride, a subtle but clear sign of the joy he felt in serving his beloved handler. 1 year later, Willowbrook Heights had been completely transformed. Under new, compassionate leadership, the HOA had become a model of inclusivity and community support. They had installed audio signals at all crosswalks, created wheelchair-accessible community gardens, established a scholarship fund for students with disabilities, and implemented strict anti-discrimination policies. Margaret's former house stood empty for months. No one wanted to purchase the home that had belonged to the woman who had become a symbol of neighborhood hatred and discrimination. Eventually, it was bought by a non-profit organization and converted into a training facility for service dogs, creating a beautiful irony that was lost on no one in the community. Sarah thrived at Stanford Law School, where she specialized in disability rights law and became a powerful advocate for change. Max accompanied her to every single class, and both had become beloved figures on campus. Thor, the retired military dog, had found his calling as a therapy dog who visited children in hospitals, bringing comfort and joy wherever he went. Colonel Martinez had retired from active duty and taken a position with the Department of Veterans Affairs, working tirelessly to improve services for disabled veterans. His experience with Sarah and Max had opened his eyes to the daily challenges faced by people with disabilities, and he had made it his personal mission to create positive change. The case of Martinez versus Thornfield had become a landmark decision in disability rights law, cited in legal textbooks and used as a teaching tool in law schools across the nation. Sarah's testimony had been quoted in Supreme Court briefs and congressional hearings, helping to strengthen protections for service animals and their handlers. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't in the courtrooms or the legal precedents or even the prison sentence. It was in the simple, precious freedom to walk down any street with Max at her side, knowing that they were protected by law and surrounded by a community that valued their dignity, independence, and humanity. Margaret Thornfield had tried to break Sarah's spirit and destroy her independence. Instead, she had unleashed a force for justice that would protect thousands of people with disabilities for generations to come. And Max was just happy to be by Sarah's side, doing what he loved most in the world, guiding his human through life with unwavering love, loyalty, and dedication. His golden coat might have carried a small scar from that terrible day, but his spirit remained unbroken, his purpose unchanged, his heart full of the pure joy that comes from serving someone you love. He was a good boy, the very best boy in the world. And every single day of his life proved that love conquers hatred, service conquers selfishness, and the bond between a person and their service dog is sacred, protected not just by law, but by the fundamental decency of humanity itself. The morning sun still cast long shadows across Willowbrook Heights, but now those shadows were filled with understanding, compassion, and hope for a better tomorrow.